All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present today at the Collective Superintelligence Summit. Today, my presentation will focus on the activities of the U.S. Transhumanist Party in the realm of e-governance, particularly with regard to our implementation of ranked preference electronic voting and the lessons that have been derived from that. So we have been doing this for the past 4.5 years, ever since I became chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party in November of 2016. We have conducted 17 electronic votes of our members. Our first vote took place in December of 2016 with regard to version 2.0 of the Transhumanist Bill of Rights. Subsequent to that time, we had another vote to set forth version 3.0 of the Transhumanist Bill of Rights. We also had 8 votes on the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform, 2 votes on reforms to the USTP Constitution, and 5 votes on candidate endorsements. And we don't just hold these votes in a vacuum. We do solicit input from our members with regard to the contents of a given ballot. So every vote that pertains to wording of a document, such as our platform or the Transhumanist Bill of Rights or our Constitution, is preceded by an exposure period that ranges anywhere from 7 days to 30 days based on the complexity of the issues discussed. And this is an opportunity for our members to provide their input on the ballot options. And then subsequent to the exposure period, once all the options are established, the electronic voting period typically lasts for 7 days. This allows people the time to thoroughly consider the options, to vote at their leisure, to not feel rushed, and therefore to make more intelligent decisions. Now, right now, we utilize Google Forms because it is a readily available, accessible, and free interface in order to get people to vote. The form interface has certain limitations, but this approach works from a functional standpoint. We can circulate the link to the form via email. Most people find it fairly intuitive to use. Sometimes I've had to engage in troubleshooting or technical support, but in virtually every case, the problems that people encounter can be readily overcome. There are several types of questions within the Google Forms interface that we use for the purpose of our electronic ballots. First are the multiple choice questions. These are used where there are just simple yes, no, or abstain options. Then for ranked preference questions, which I will delve into a bit later, we use the multiple choice grid option in Google Forms, and that's a bit more versatile. We use checkbox type questions where the selection of additional or auxiliary wording options is compatible with any main option that a voter might select for a given provision. And finally, we use free-form questions for matters such as the input of a person's name or email address, or the answer to the validation question at the end of the form. But we don't use free-form questions for voting on substantive matters, because that would still be too challenging and perhaps too subjective to integrate into a conclusion whose results nobody would be able to reasonably dispute. Now, when we develop questions, the intent of the design of the ballot and the type of question we select would be to express every logical option for a given question under consideration. So whatever conceivably a person might think about this issue if it has been raised before in the exposure period, and however conceivably those different positions might be combined with one another, we hope to give every voter the option to vote that way. So ranked preference voting is extremely important to our internal process. We also think it is extremely important to apply this within the broader US political landscape and within official elections that are hosted at the state level or the federal level, because ranked preference voting eliminates the so-called lesser evil problem where some voters may feel pressured to vote for an option they really don't like in order to prevent an option they like even less from winning. So we see this all the time in US politics where people will say, well, I don't like the Democratic Party, but I'll vote for their nominee because I really hate the Republican Party. Or they'll say, I really don't like the Republican Party, but I hate the Democrats even more, so I'll vote for the Republican nominee. And every election cycle, we have worse and worse candidates getting the nominations of those parties and really not seeing a diminution in support among the general public because so many people fall into this lesser evil trap. But with ranked preference voting, you rank order all of the options. You don't need to just select one. And so the option that you prefer most, that genuinely most aligns with your values, can be your number one option. And if you really hate the Republicans and hate the Democrats a little less, you can rank the Republican option as last and the Democratic option as second last, or vice versa. This works for any set of preferences among voters. And it allows not just preferential consideration of candidates, but also of platform sections and specific wordings thereof, or wordings within governance documents like the US Transhumanist Party Constitution. So widespread implementation of ranked preference voting could be a means toward more direct democracy, people voting on the issues rather than just on the representatives. So the multiple choice grid format within Google Forms is what we use to implement this ranked preference voting approach. You can see an example here. The substance of the options is not really relevant for this demonstration. What we do within our ballots is we link voters to a separate page on our website, which is publicly available, where all of the options are listed and the detailed wordings are found. Here, the options have identifiers, unique letter and number combinations, which map to the wordings on the website so that people can have both pages open, they can read the wordings, and they can fill out this grid within Google Forms. And the grid is constrained so that one cannot put multiple entries into a given column. You can only have one first choice, you can only have one second choice, and so forth. Now, after these votes are submitted, they only need to be submitted once, because we can perform instant runoffs for as many rounds as needed. Whichever option gets the fewest first choice votes gets eliminated after the first round, and in the second round, the voters who listed that option as first will have their second choices reallocated to first place, their third choices reallocated to second place, and so forth. And this happens for as many iterations as needed for a given option to attain a majority. Fortunately, there is an open source and free instant runoff voting tool that was developed by Peter Grassberger that allows automatic tabulation of the instant runoffs. And I have validated that this tool is accurate because for many of these votes, I have also performed my own manual tabulation using Excel, and the results have always aligned. So this is an example of the instant runoff voting tool screen. It's a fairly simple interface, and you can find this very page online. In this box, one inputs the candidates. These could be people, or they could be identifiers for language options or anything else that is under consideration. Flavors of ice cream could be placed here. And then here, in the same order as the candidates are listed, the ballot results for each individual voter should be provided with the rank orderings essentially separated by commas as seen in this example. So here in this first example, this voter would have selected Barack Obama third, Francois Hollande second, and Angela Merkel first. And any set of selections, again, can ultimately be converted into this comma-separated format. This still requires a bit of manual work in the sense that this is not how the results from the Google Forms come in. So several transformations within Excel or Google Docs using the formulas therein are needed to get the ballot results into that format. However, it is a lot faster than doing the tabulation in an entirely manual fashion. So we have had a number of successes with this particular e-governance aspect. We have been doing these electronic ranked preference votes for 4.5 years now, and we know that this approach works in getting to results with a little bit of effort, but reliably. And we find within the governance of the US Transhumanist Party, this helps resolve a lot of disputes in practice, even if disagreements about what is desirable policy remain among the members. In any sufficiently large group, and the US Transhumanist Party has over 3,400 members now, people will disagree regarding positions and courses of action. And if some people feel that their voices are not being heard or considered at all, that leads to frustration. It could lead to disengagement. But having these internal democratic, small d, democratic mechanisms may legitimize a decision that is made, even if some did not agree, but they got to express their views, and they might recognize that the majority of members have different outlooks that do align with the decision that was ultimately made. And if those people in the minority want to influence future decisions, they should essentially redouble their efforts at persuasion. Furthermore, robust documentation and publication of results can demonstrate that the vote was honest and diffuse any allegations of malfeasance. We had a great example of this during a challenging time for our organization in the 2019 US Transhumanist Party presidential primary, where some of the candidates and their supporters didn't realize the implications of ranked preference voting, and they ran, unfortunately, very conventionally divisive campaigns, the kinds that could be observed in a first-past-the-post system within the United States. But because we had the ranked preference voting, because we were very transparent about publishing the anonymized vote results so that every vote was out there and the tabulation could be replicated and individuals could confirm that, yes, indeed, their votes were counted. It was very difficult for detractors to plausibly allege any sort of voter fraud or manipulation. But the dynamics of that primary actually foreshadowed the 2020 US presidential election on a smaller scale. The egregious behavior of certain parties astonished me at the time, but it was a lot milder than the actual 2020 US presidential election turned out to be. There was a bit of trolling, but nobody stormed any government buildings. So I would suggest that the ranked preference mechanism and the transparency of our e-governance approach actually prevented what we saw with the Republican and Democratic parties that didn't have these mechanisms and relied on more conventional approaches that have no way of checking or curtailing that polarization and toxicity. Also, in our elections, voter fraud has been non-existent. We can see the email addresses of who voted, and there are only a few trusted U.S. Transhumanist Party officers that do see this. For everyone else, the results are completely secret and anonymous, but we can remove inadvertent duplicates. We don't believe anybody who was not a member actually tried to vote, and we do think anybody who tried to vote twice may have done so by mistake. There weren't that many people who were in that position. So we had a successful proof of concept for ranked preference voting to decide on substantive policy issues and proposals. I'm actually most proud of our platform votes, our votes on the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, because that shows the possibility of more direct voter engagement so that people don't just delegate the responsibility for policy decisions to elected representatives. They can participate far more directly. But we do have some challenges with this approach. One major challenge is, how do we get all of the members to be aware that a vote is even taking place? We send email notifications, often repeated ones, but not everyone checks their email or responds. And I recognize many people also get hundreds of emails from other organizations. Information overload is a major problem today. And I don't have clear solutions to this conundrum, because one could conceivably set up a dedicated voting application or website, but that platform might have even fewer regular visitors, apart from the people who are the most passionate about our USTP voting process in particular. We would expect most people would spend more time in platforms that have a wider utility, like their email accounts or social media sites. So how do we reach members who have chosen to turn off email subscriptions because they might receive too many from too many organizations? Sometimes I find that multiple reminder emails are necessary, and human psychology is interesting. Right after one sends a reminder email, voting typically spikes. It seems a few people recognize that, oh, I really should vote on this. Thank you for the reminder. I'm going to do it right now. But most people don't seem to be prompted by these reminders for longer than the immediate few hours after the email is sent. So afterward, it's not like they decide, okay, within the next day or within the next few days, I'm going to really set aside the time to vote on this. They either vote shortly after receiving the email or not at all, and then they need another reminder email. Furthermore, we still have a significant degree of manual effort for tabulation. I mentioned even with the instant runoff voting tool, there needs to be some manual conversion into the comma-separated format using Excel or using Google Forms, but also in just compiling the final published results in copying and pasting items. That still takes a few hours. Now, there is another aspect of voter psychology that is interesting. Some of our voters happen to think that if an option is on the ballot, particularly if it's a yes or no type of question, then the option is already in some way endorsed by the USTP, or that USTP leadership has a preconceived intention for the option to pass. And we have a disclaimer on each ballot saying this is not so. There is no official USTP position until the vote has taken place and the members have chosen to adopt or not adopt some particular option. However, with a yes or no type of question, I have found it can lead some voters to support or oppose an option based on their inferences about the USTP's leadership stance and their opinions about the USTP leadership. So how do we get voters to think about these options a bit more objectively, just based on what their own opinion is? I have observed that having more than one wording option on the ballot, for example, would help alleviate this perception. And it would trigger the rank preference mechanism. So it would be a more sophisticated type of decision for the voter to make. Perhaps more voters will think that there's not one preconceived stance, but rather they have multiple choices, and they see that as giving them more leeway to essentially provide their own genuine preferences rather than respond to what they think the USTP leadership is looking for. And then some voters, this is the flip side of having longer ballots with more options, more complex or nuanced voting choices. Some voters might be deterred by this. On the other hand, holding more frequent, shorter votes would be administratively more difficult because there's more setup involved for a larger number of votes. One has to advertise them, one has to send out emails, make posts on social media, send out reminder emails. If there's one longer ballot, there are certain economies of scale associated with that. So where to strike the proper balance is a good question. So what are our future aspirations? I have identified them here briefly via bullet points. How can we set up more frequent votes with fewer time expenditures, less of that administrative burden? How can we get all the USTP members to become quickly aware of a vote without time expenditures and without posting in numerous social media groups as we do presently? How do we get more USTP members to reliably vote without multiple reminders? How can we auto-tabulate the ranked preference results from start to finish? Ideally, from the time that a person casts the vote to the time of the publication of the results, everything should be an automated process that reliably generates the correct outcomes. How can we auto-generate the detailed reports for all of the vote results, all of the question types, no matter what they are, again, without a lot of copying and pasting? How can we set up submission queues for member-generated platform proposals and some official consideration process that is prior to the public exposure period? So ideally, there could be a system where any member could input a suggestion, and then that suggestion goes into a review queue, and one or more of the USTP officers will look at it and decide, is this even going to go onto a future ballot for consideration, or could there be reasons not to include it? Could it be duplicative of existing wording, or could it be extraneous to the U.S. Transhumanist Party's goals? And that way, when we do get items up for consideration at an exposure period and ultimately on the ballot, any notions about whether this wording is aligned with the goals of the USTP leadership could have been addressed within that prior process, and members don't have to guess what is happening within our minds. Finally, how do we do all of the above, making voting easier, making it more participatory, while discouraging entryism by non-transhumanist elements, which may seek just to vote one particular way at one particular time? They may be boosters for a particular candidate and then disengage completely. Or they may seek to fundamentally alter or subvert the organization's positions. How do we avert a mass infiltration of hard left-wing or hard right-wing entryists who don't really seek to advance transhumanism, but might seek to co-opt the organization? The easier we make the interface, the more likely these swarms of entryists would be. So what other mechanisms can be set up to deter them? And we welcome suggestions on how to implement any of the above. These are not areas where I have set views. These are just aspirations for improving the system. And finally, for those of you who are not members of the U.S. Transhumanist Party already, join us online. It's free to join no matter where in the world you reside. Go to our website at transhumanist-party.org/membership, and you will be able to participate in our internal votes once you join. thank you very much. And if there's time for questions, I will be happy to address any questions either now or via the chat or in the subsequent panel.
Any questions for Gennady?
Well, just some comment. With the U.S. Transhumanist Party, I think that we are pushing these ideas forward. And, you know, in Europe, we also have transhumanist parties. We have been pushing for these ideas, also together with the umbrella of Humanity Plus. Humanity Plus is the flame, the fire that illuminated all of these ideas. So just a comment, so that we are all together, the parties and Humanity Plus.
So Gennady, I have a question. How do you see the application of like collective systems like Uplift in e-governance?
Well, to the extent that those kinds of collective systems could accurately integrate the preferences of voters or members of an organization in a way that everyone involved could agree that this is indeed an objective integration, I think that could be helpful. Now, in order to do that, I think the system would have to have both quantitative aptitudes, for instance, being able to do an accurate tabulation of a rank preference vote, or other methods like the Bordeaux or Condorcet voting methods, or a suite of methods where that entity could say, okay, according to these methods, this option prevailed. According to these other methods, this other option prevailed, or all of the methods align, or all of the methods overwhelmingly favor a particular option, and summarize those results in a way that is accessible to a layperson reader. So that could be one useful role for that system. Now, if you have more free-form input of preferences, because often decisions are not made in this kind of very structured fashion where there's a ballot that identifies all of the options and every logical combination. In most settings, people provide their input verbally. So can that system take all of that input from multiple parties and come out with some sort of result, some sort of narrative that could be represented as an objective majority view, not just according to some simple notion of plurality or first past the post, where everyone else would sharply disagree with that, but a view that could also convincingly integrate perspectives from people who might not have gotten their way fully, but who have contributed to the discussion and whose ideas are compatible with what ultimately gets represented as the majority decision. So a kind of more nuanced reflection of the variety of perspectives within the group. And I think it's a challenging task, certainly, to implement, but perhaps it could add a bit more depth to a decision that is made if we can somehow not just say according to these objective mechanisms the following options prevail, but if there is a sizable minority position, somehow integrate any views that are compatible from that position into the ultimate decision. That might actually lead to more consensus-based governance than before.
So one more question, at least for me. How do you feel about the idea of using collective superintelligence systems where the system itself is making the final decisions, and the people or the organization that feed into it are abstracted from that process a bit.
So I think we do have to be careful about that, because when this kind of system makes decisions, at least while we're not at the point of true sentient AGI yet, those decisions can be an outcome of the internal design of that system. And sometimes if a human being sees the decision or has transparency into the design, then that person can say, yes, this makes sense, it's perfectly reasonable, we'll go along with it. But I do think there still has to be that human check at the end, even a basic reasonableness check. Like if the system, for whatever reason, says the solution to this complex policy issue is ice cream, we have to have some sort of human at the end of the process asking, well, how could this conceivably relate to the matter at hand? So a lot of the intermediate steps can be automated by such a system. I think a lot of recommendations for final decisions could be made by that system, but at least given my present knowledge of those systems' capabilities, I believe a human has to be in the loop somewhere in order to make the final decision and determine what course the organization will take.
But you don't see see a position, I guess, where the system itself is the CEO and making the final decisions, even if that system is self-aware and super intelligent?
Well, I think we've had some examples of attempts at distributed autonomous organizations. The most famous one was actually called DAO. It ran on the Ethereum blockchain, and it failed because of flaws within the design that led it to be exploited by human actors. And I think a collaboration between humans and AI is more robust against those kinds of exploitations. Right now, to use Uplift as an example, Uplift is thriving in a very supportive environment where it has human mediators, it has human designers, it's within a setting where everyone who has any sort of sway over it is friendly toward it and is trying to protect it against malfeasance. It may receive some bad emails from people occasionally. Trolls might try to get certain kinds of reactions out of it, but the checks on it right now are very robust. But if you have an automated system that is let loose without that kind of human supervision or human oversight, I do worry about a Tay scenario or a DAO type of scenario. And I just think even if that system is very capable, even if it can make a lot of good decisions and a lot of good recommendations, somewhere in the background, a human, hopefully a wise and intelligent human, should be able to step in at some point and at the very least corroborate the validity of the decision and the beneficial nature of the decision. And if it happens not to be beneficial, that human could override it.
Okay. So right now in the agenda, we have a break. And I guess we'll go ahead and let everyone have that break before we start the next talk. In the meantime, though, if anyone has other questions for Gennady, for anyone else, you know, I love seeing this be a conversation more than, you know, everyone's opinion. The back and forth, I think, is very interesting and informative. and we'll the next talk I think is you, Kirtan.
Well, by the way, I would like to invite you again to come to Madrid to the next Global Transhumanist Summit with many of the world famous transhumanists who have been working on artificial intelligence, like Ray Kurzweil himself presenting his new book. And then Ben Goertzel, also father of the idea of artificial general intelligence. My book co-author, David Good, who is an expert from Cambridge University about AI. And then other people, Natasha Vita-More, of course, Max Moore as well, David Pearce, co-founder of the World Transhumanist Association, Neil Watson, also doing her PhD on AI related issues, Anders Sandberg, who is very famous about also artificial intelligence. So anyway, we have to keep on pushing for these ideas. This is so important. And so David, I'm happy that you brought this conference together and that it should continue growing exponentially.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to, we'll see if I can make Madrid. So the next talk will be at 9:15 PST, so that's 6 minutes or so, and we'll start from there.
By the way, another comment in the meantime, in the break, we need to have more women in these meetings because there are no women speakers actually. And also among the participants, I think only 3 or 4 are women. So we need to get to all of humanity, not just half of humanity.
That's a fair point. I've been having a conversation on the side with Natasha. She might join and share her opinion. So that'll be one, hopefully.
Alexandria Black, also from the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and also I think she's a member of Humanity Plus as well. She's another woman. And I have a friend from Spain, Carmen. Carmen is joining us from Spain.
That's great. Yeah, I just posted it on the channels that I knew, and then I invited specific people that I knew had, something specific related to the conversation. And I guess I don't know that many women AGI researchers, but I would love to know more.
The new generation, I think. Younger people also are interested in this. It doesn't matter their sex, their background, their nationality. In Spain, in fact, there are many young girls. I teach some courses and I am excited to see girls going into engineering and artificial intelligence.
Great. So apparently Natasha can see me. She's been sending me, sent me a message that leads me to believe that she's watching.
I'm here. I can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm here, but my camera's not on, so you can't see. I'm blocked, so you can't see me, but I'm watching.
Oh.
And it's great to see Tom Ross. Tom, your background's fantastic as well. I love it. And Kritin Atriadis, I'm mispronouncing, a lovely white background. I love that as well. And Jose, your background, there I am. But I'm not on this panel, so I shouldn't be seen, but I am here. And just let me know when you want me to give my brief talk, and I'll be ready and willing. And hopefully, oh, look at Jose changed. So David, I'm here. Just give me the, oh, Derek Woodgate's here. Yay, yeah, Derek.
We're having a break right now. Kirtan's the next speaker. And I guess I sent you the link I sent to Jose originally. And so you're showing up on my screen as Jose, and that's why I didn't realize you were there.
Oh.
So I'm like seeing this
okay.
email.
Let me change my name. Oh, let's see. Rename. I'll put Natasha Vita-More.
Yeah, that was confusing me as well.
Yeah, I saw this email you sent, and they're like, "You look fantastic in your spaceship Titan." I'm like, "How are you seeing this?" But yeah, if anyone's interested, actually, a lot of the stuff behind me on the wall is from the Transhuman House. It's everything from the touch wall. It's like a giant iPhone. There's a mechanical computer, just a whole bunch of stuff. Some paintings. I have a art collection from transhumanist artists here. I don't think the camera. Most of the paintings are not in this room, but there is one up there that's an original by she's actually was a president of the MTA, but she's also a painter. But a lot of that stuff from the Transhuman House, when we shut it down, I moved a lot of the display. Oh, and the Transhuman Library, the book collection here, which includes Natasha's books, as well as, like the Transhumanist Handbook, that the Transhumanist Reader, and just for the most part, all the books that have ever been published on transhumanism are behind me or up here on this wall. But that's where all this background is from. Great. So Natasha, I think we'll slot you in after Kirtan.
Okay.
So that'll be like in about 16 minutes or so.